Do you ever notice that when anybody talks about exporting more Alberta heavy crude, that they always talk about supply, not demand? They always talk about how much, oil Alberta has, Canada has. They don't talk about where the customers might be or not be. And I kind of get it. I mean, Canada has the third largest oil reserves in the world. 170 billion barrels of recoverable crude in the Alberta oil sands. I mean, it's massive. And frankly, the Alberta oil companies the oil sands companies have done an amazing job of getting their production costs down. A lot of their break-evens are in the, low 40s to mid 40s. And if they're running on a half cycle basis, just the cash costs, it can be down into the 20s. I mean, Canadian heavy crude, we're the 800-pound gorilla in the global heavy crude market. It's about 10 million barrels a day of heavy crude demand, and we supply 3.3 million barrels of it. And so I kind of get it, but by the same token, nobody ever asks who in Asia is going to buy this oil. And the odd person well, I shouldn't say the odd person. What I get mostly is just talking points. Oh, China will take it. And if you push them a little harder and go, well, who in China? They'll go, oh, it's the petrochemical plant, because they have built a number, I think it's 3 or 4, these massive petrochemical refinery complexes like Hengi, for instance, 400,000 barrels a day. I don't even think that's the biggest one. There's some problems with that. And one of them is that there are competitors that are a lot closer. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, even Venezuela and Mexico. It costs a lot less to ship heavy crude over to China. And in India for that matter, it's about the same price. And so by the time you take into account the 11 or 12 bucks for the Trans Mountain Expansion pipeline tolls, and then insurance and dockage fees, and then 5 or 6 bucks to put it on a ship and an oil tanker and send it over to China, you're looking at somewhere between $15 and $18 a barrel. Well, the Saudis do it for $2, and Iraq does it for $2, and Mexico and Venezuela cost $5 or $6. So you tack on $18 of transportation costs, and you have to wonder, if in fact Alberta heavy crude can compete. Now, I know there's a refinery there that a refining company has set up an office in Calgary actually, and they've contracted for 300,000 barrels a day. Well, that's great, but China does, I don't know, I can't remember what it is, it's 10 or 15 million barrels a day of oil that it consumes. And in the petrochemical side, it's about 1.7 million barrels and rising. It's forecast to rise by 1 million barrels a day by 2030. And so everybody just kind of, vague waves their hand and goes, yeah, China will take it. Don't think about the competitors at all. And there are some other issues, like the Western Canadian Select, their Cold Lake, the heavy blends that we send from Alberta are a higher acidic count than the competition. And there has to be an upgraded metallurgy in the refineries so that they can run it. Well, not that many refineries have it. Out of their little teapot, they're independent refiners, maybe 4 or 5 out of 40, a fleet of 40, have, the extra cokers and other equipment needed to process heavy crude, and then on top of it, the metallurgy to handle it as well. And that's not all. I mean, most of the crude we send over there is really heavy. It's about 20 API gravity or below, and most of those refineries and petrochemical complexes are configured for Basra and Saudi heavy. So they're talking about 25, 26, which is a lighter heavy crude. So the point I'm trying to get at here is complexity. And we haven't even started talking about the energy transition, because I find that Canadians, as a rule, are kind of ignorant of what's going on in China. China has become the world's first electro-state. It's electrifying its transportation sector at a dizzying rate. Last year, 50% of all vehicles were electric or had a plug. And this year it's forecast to be 60 or 65. By 2030, should be about between 80 and 90%, be like Norway, right? And it won't take long to turn over the auto fleet at that rate, and it'll be largely electrified. But that's not the real. Well, I mean, that is a major contributor to peak oil demand in China by 2026 or 2027. But it's what they're doing in their long-haul trucking that's a real eye-opener. So in order to get their emissions down, they're both electrifying a small percentage at this point, because the batteries are probably a couple of years away from being able to support those big semi-tractors. But they're switching them over to liquefied petroleum gas and away from diesel. And heavy crude, a lot of that gets made into diesel. And so the demand is falling from in the transportation sector, which is 45% of all global fuel oil demand. 2 and 3 wheelers, which are huge in Asia, huge in China. The entire fleet is almost electrified. I think it was 1.8 billion of them. I mean, there's a lot of 2 and 3 wheelers in China, and they're about like 70% electrified already. And on top of that, China is exporting a lot of its spare capacity. It's like its auto industry is exporting EVs and exporting batteries and solar panels, and they're going into Latin America and places where the demand for oil was supposed to rise because they're emerging economies. But if they electrify transportation, that is not going to happen. And the energy transition and peak oil demand in 2030, which is what the International Energy Agency is forecasting, just never comes into the conversation. I mean, it's a major, major risk factor. So, those who say, well, oil demand in China is going to rise after, between now and 2050, let's say, not even OPEC believes that. OPEC thinks it's going to flatten out in the 2030s. And the more pessimistic forecasters are saying that the rapid electrification of transportation will more than offset any gains to be had in the petrochemical sector, which is another argument that's often trotted out. And there's a whole lot of modeling around this. That's probably a couple dozen companies and agencies that do modeling, and you can go and have a look at it and test the assumptions and get a good idea. But this idea that, well, we'll just send it to China. China's growing and Asia is growing. What are your customers doing? Now, I want to end this video with a little analogy. I've been in business most of my life, and a couple times I've had to go to the bank and ask for a loan. And when I walk in there, I have to have a business plan and I have to have financial projections. And the financial projections have to have assumptions attached to them. And whatever, is my market going to grow? Am I going to be able to outcompete the other products or services that are in the market? That kind of thing. And then, you spend about a half an hour or an hour getting grilled by the loan manager to make sure that you've done a good job on your business plan. We don't even subject the assumptions and the conclusions of Alberta Premier Danielle Smith or the oil industry about, we don't even do the kind of due diligence that the loan manager would do when assessing my loan application. We don't even do that for oil exports to China, and yet now we're talking about building a pipeline to the West Coast from Alberta that would cost tens of billions of dollars. We're not having that conversation. And if that's the level of due diligence and that we apply to these kinds of projects, woe is us. We deserve to have, lose money if it comes to that. And then there are alternatives. Check out my video from today, earlier, about Drubit, D-R-U-B-I-T, which takes a diluent out of dilbit and then allows you to ship heavy crude by rail. So you could ship it from Edmonton to Prince Rupert, send it over that way. So this is a complex topic, the pipelines. The supply end of it is not the issue, it's the demand end. And I'll have a lot more to say about that. We have a report coming out hopefully this week, but maybe the week after, suggesting alternatives, looking at the market and then suggesting alternatives on how to supply it and what we think is a better strategy. So stay tuned.